身为主管的你，我相信这个月会非常的充实。大家书架上一定有一叠的书还来不及看吧，所以这个月就交给我们。那在这个月呢，顾问们会分享关于管理学的知识以及实用的沟通技巧。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. It's a new month, it's a new theme, and this month we really want to dive into what makes great managers or great leaders. And so by doing that throughout the month, we're going to be looking at a few books written by famous leaders and also other materials that have been produced on this topic. But today we wanted to overview a few of the books that have been top of mind or that we've read recently that really stood out to us as we each kind of run our own managerial journey.
And I have to say, these 4 books were all recommended by Nick. And Nick, would you say you're a much better manager at this point after consuming all these books?
I wouldn't particularly say that I have become a better manager by reading these books, but a lot of the topics that have been important to me or that I've really wanted to consider more when it comes to team building, a lot of these books cover topics that have really stood out to me. And although there are a lot of books out there on leadership and management, and I've read quite a few, some of them seem rather intuitive, some of them seem a little cold, but for specific things that were in my mind when it came to team building, when it came to building systems, when it came to actually how do you develop 10x people in your company. You know, most companies are obsessed with finding the 10x engineer or finding the 10x marketer. But I think for a lot of the books that I have been picking up, it's not about how to find these people, but actually how to build these people.
那其实 Nick 在推荐给我这4本书之后呢，我就开始了去做一些 research， 那也去读了这些书。那我发现其实这4本书等于说是一个管理书籍上来讲蛮好的一个 balance。因为其实说到管理书籍有各式各样子的，有一些是关于到 productivity， 有些是关系到文化，有些是关系到 just specifically 你要怎么去管理人才，有什么方法技巧。但我觉得这4本书它有一个蛮不错的一个平衡 because everything these 4 books basically encompass it. What is the high productivity and how do you manage really difficult situations, or how do you cultivate a culture that allows employees to be very free and creative. So I feel like these 4 books has kind of its own space and it provides value from a different perspective.
So the first book that we wanted to cover, and it was actually my first recommendation, was The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And this is a book by Ben Horowitz of famed Loud Cloud, A16Z. He started with Mark Andreessen, one of the most prominent venture capital firms now in Silicon Valley, even though it's one of the youngest in relationship to the other people that it gets compared to. But what I really appreciated about this book, and we'll dive into the details of it in a different episode, but he's one of the first people who actually deliberately shows all of the bad parts or all of the depressing parts about building a business, right? A lot of these management or leadership books are all about like, here are successes. Here's how I built a team. And Ben Horowitz was like, basically, here's everything I messed up and what I learned from it.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is quite depressing. From the very beginning of the book, he talked about all the hardships and they were really, really tough. You know, health scares, on the brink of bankruptcy, or it's just all these very difficult things about being an entrepreneur. So it is depressing, but I think a lot of people kind of avoid talking about depressing stuff because it's like it's supposed to be inspiring and motivating. But I think we need to talk about the hard things, right?
Right. So he talks about like, what is it like to fire a lot of people? What is it like to fire a top manager? And then actually realizing that if you have to fire a manager, it's probably your fault. And actually accepting that. There's another book that's quite similar that we won't necessarily talk about this month, but I think anyone who's going through starting a business or building a team should read is called Lost and Founder by Rand Fishkin. He started quite a successful SEO company, one of the first that really got built up in the early days of, you know, Google, Yahoo exploding. But he talks a lot about like the depression that founders go through. And that's not to say that you need to read a book that's quite a downer, but it's actually that I think what he and Ben Horowitz really outline is some of the best lessons that you can get come when something went horribly wrong. Yeah. And it really takes people to reflect back and think carefully about what happened to get that lesson. Whereas other people will measure their successes and then just go.
Right. Now, another book that we're going to cover in our EP Insights episode is The High Output Management by Andrew S. Grove. Now, this is a classic, right? It was written or published in 1983.
Yeah, Andy Grove is actually the guy who turned Intel from a memory chip business into the absolute monster that it is today in terms of the type of products, especially silicon products that they produced from chips. I think anyone who grew up in the 90s know that Intel Inside slogan. I mean, that's all got created under his management. But he's actually the one who inspired our first book, Ben Horowitz, to write. But one of the big things that I like about this, and we'll dive more into, is both Ben Horowitz, because of him, and he really, really emphasize one-on-ones. Which is, if you are not meeting with your team that directly reports to you, and they say like on a weekly basis in a one-on-one, you're doing it wrong. And in fact, both he and Ben Horowitz have threatened to fire people because he found out they're not doing this kind of one-on-one growth training for people they're mentoring.
The next book we're going to cover would be No Rules Rules by Reed Hastings and Aaron Meyer. Now, right off the bat, I knew that I would be very interested in this book because it's co-written by Aaron Meyer, which is and was an author of The Culture Map. 那 Culture Map 在我们这个 podcast 上面其实也讨论过非常多次，尤其是跟所有文化一些沟通相关的议题。I knew I would really like this book and the direction of this book, and I think I was right. And I think Netflix is such a interesting company to read about, and I don't want it to ruin a lot of these interesting facts that we're going to share in EPI. But basically, it is like the titles, no rules, rules. So when there's a company with no rules, what would that look like? And why would they create no rules for the company?
What's really interesting about this book is that it seems like it would be in contrast to the first two books we talked about, which are two founders that are very interested in structure. So they talk a lot about how you build structure, how you build processes, and now you have a company whose culture is famous for not having rules. But where I think this becomes interesting, and it doesn't contradict the other side, is that for the first two books, it's talking about, as a manager, how do you interact with your team? How do you grow them? And how do you build better leaders within your company? What the No Rules rules really dives into is how do you create internal motivation for your team? How do you create intrinsic motivation in a way where it's just like by being at the company, by believing in the culture of the company, people want to get things done. And that's not by creating more restrictions. It's by actually creating a culture or a set of feelings about how people want to build the company that they feel motivated to build it. And so you have like a very leadership creation style of Andy Grove and Ben Horowitz. And then you have the Reed Hastings, like open it up. Let people be creative, let them explore, and they'll get excited about what goes on. There's another company that is very similar to this, Valve, which if anyone is a video game junkie like me, that name should sound familiar. They created the Steam platform. They were famous for all the Half-Life series. But for a very long time, their employee handbook was really, really famous among all companies because it was like their rules of, do you want to join a project? Okay, take your desk, it's on wheels, move it over to whatever team that you want to be on. Say, hey guys, I'm really interested in the project you're building. Can I join your team? And that's it. Like they didn't assign people certain things. They didn't say, okay, this is your job. This is your project. This is the game you're allowed to work on, or this is the product you're allowed to work on. They're basically like, you want to go do something cool? You go find the team of people who are doing that cool thing, and then you join them. If you don't see a team, you create one. And so it's that creativity was fostered, and Valve has created some of the most innovative games and innovative gaming platforms in the business. But it came because there wasn't as rigid of a structure. It was that open creativity. And Netflix is another company that's famous for creating that.
And I remember this from an interview with Reed Hastings, and he mentioned that the reason why he wanted to create a company with no rules is because, I mean, Netflix itself and like the video game company, 他们并不是一个 production or manufacturer, right? 那当你已经成为一个，就是你的这个公司的本身，它的 core value 就是你的创造力，你的 creativity. 那这个时候呢，你就不能有这么多的限制. So I thought that was really interesting because even within a company itself, you may have a lot of departments that should thrive on creativity. So if you work in a company or work in a team that, let's say marketing or advertising or design, you need to live and thrive on creativity. And I really recommend you guys to check out this book.
It's worth reading. I actually know, specifically because of this book, a lot of companies that operate remotely. Again, there's not a lot of oversight. There's not a place to check in. People are operating on their own time, on their own time zone. They give this book to everyone to read because it's back to, we can have this open creativity and foster your own time, but it's for the good of the company. And so I know specifically of at least two companies that the moment a new employee joins, this is the book that they hand them and they go, read this. This is how we operate.
Now, the next book we're going to cover in our EPI episode is The Making of a Manager by Julie Jewell. And I thought this is a really good book, especially if you're about to become a manager or you wanted to understand what it's like to be a manager or what it takes to be a leader. This is definitely the book to go.
Yeah, this book is interesting. For context, the author was the lead design, like UI designer for Facebook when it was growing. She was like one of the first employees in the company, and then it ended up being all of design manager. Why I particularly liked this book is because it talks about, if, some people, like, they're on a career path. They're like, my plan is to become a manager. Like, I dream of, upper management. For the author, she didn't plan on being a manager. She ended up in a company that was growing so fast that just by default, by being an early employee, she became a manager. And it wasn't, she had been in this job for a long time. It's like within a few months of becoming part of the, early team. Now it's like, no, you need to manage like dozens of people. And so it's really exploring her journey of like, okay, going from I didn't think about this to I need to do this really, really well. And so it's an interesting exploration of people who have not, if you haven't thought a lot about this or this hasn't been at the top of what you want to do with your career path, but you find that, oh, okay, I'm ready to step into that, or I'm starting to take on these roles, this is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with a lot of people, at some point in your career, you have to decide on, is managerial position really for me? Because that may be the only track in your company. 就是这个时候呢，你可能不是被 promoted 成为一个主管，要不然你就是得换公司，要不然你就是 find something else to do. 所以我觉得有的时候当主管，到底你适不适合当主管？到底当主管需要什么样子的特质？还有你必须要很清楚了解我必须要该做什么事情。那我觉得这本书真的不错。So I really recommend for anyone who's in the mid-30s or early 30s, and this is a part of the path that you think you have to take or you want to take. This is definitely something for you.
So these books, of course, will have links in the show notes. We're going to explore these among other topics, articles, and a series of everything through the month, both in our regular episodes and our EPI episodes, kind of exploring is like, what are the great leadership or management qualities? What are the different pieces of advice out there? And how do you find the one that works for you? I think that's one of the things is like everyone's like, okay, I'll pick up a management book.
Yeah.
I will become that type of manager. But in reality, there's a lot of different types of managers and they've all had success in different ways. And so finding the topics that resonate with you, finding the things that you want to learn from or that you want to incorporate becomes really important. So throughout this month, we'll be exploring that, sharing our own experiences, growing as, high-level directors in growing companies and how that feels putting these things to work.
那记得就是在我们平常 EP episode 当中呢，我们还是会继续的分享一些管理的相关的一些知识还有沟通的技巧，那这些资源可能会来自很多也是书籍，或者是甚至来自一些文章 or even podcast. And in our EPI episode, we will be exploring these 4 books or even more.
So join us this month, and if there are any particular articles, books that you recommend, of course, let us know. Perhaps we may incorporate it as we go. Talk to you guys next time.
Bye. The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.